Welcome to the online class of Dr. S.K. Paul, Head of the Department of English, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PG Semester 3, course CC 10 and Unit 1. Today I am going to deliver my lecture on the Gaelic twilight and poetics of W.B. Yeats. This lecture seeks to trace the pattern of development of a young man who was denied to become the finest English poet of the 20th century. Its focus is a 15-year period between 1885, when William Butler Yeats published his first poems in the Dublin University Review, and 1899, when he published The Wind Among the Reeds. For many readers, the high water mark of Yeats's lyricism. The reader will find here little or nothing about Yeats's direction of the Abbey Theatre or about his working relationship with John Millington Synge. The first decade of this century was an exhausting and in many ways arid period. Poetic inspiration faltered, and Synge's death in 1909 came as a serious loss to Yeats, with events that came later. The Yeats-bound symbiosis, the Irish senatorship, the doctrine of a vision, and the poetry of the mature Yeats. This study has nothing to do. Why then concentrate on only 15 years of Yeats's life? Most critics agree that The Wind Among the Reeds marks the terminal point for one kind of lyricism, and by and large their attention has turned to the later poetry. Yeats's early work is, in general, not highly regarded. Thomas Parkinson once argued that Yeats has achieved limited triumphs with his early style because it treated one aspect of human experience, the anima mundi, at the expense of a larger world, the one that would include all the mind and all his experience. Years later, after Yeats had learned how to reshape his poetic style to suit theatrical demands, he would treat the conflict between anima hominis and anima mundi. The Celtic twilight is described in most literary histories as a term that connotes indecision, rhetoric at the expense of truth, a flight from reality. The first 15 years of Yeats's career, vivid though they may have been to Yeats himself, are dismissed as an apprenticeship, and Yeats, toward the end of his life, expressed the hope that younger writers would not begin as he had done, because nothing he did at that time had made it. When he reread his early poems, those which had given him so much trouble, he found little but romantic convention, unconscious drama, and he sighed. It is so. To many years before one can believe enough in what one feels, even to know what the feeling is. When T.S. Eliot said that in the early books of Yeats, he found only in a line here or there that sense of a unique personality which makes one sit up in excitement and eagerness to learn more about the author's mind and feelings. He was speaking from the perspective of a writer committed to the values of modern poetry, conciseness, tension, irony, the free play of wit, the stretching of poetical forms, the awareness of what sciences has contributed to civilization, still fashion reigns in poetry as in the other arts. It is possible that an older way of writing poetry may appeal to a future generation, and that the Celtic twilight period of Yeats's life may become popular again. It is also likely that the charges made against this poetry of dream, emotional suggestiveness, and Irish myth will not seem quite so crushing in the years ahead. We have a genuine critical question. Was Yeats's early work a facade deliberately set up and by no means representing him, or a belated example of amor courteous, the Platonic gallantry of old Provence and Trecento, Italy, and the various offshoots of that poetic conception of love, or a sincere and fairly direct expression of personality? Much of what follows is a twice-told tale, but if the monograph contributes anything new, it does so by suggesting that the years between 1885 and 1899 should be looked at through Yeats's eyes. The letters, essays, polemical contributions, and hack work written during these years give us a much fresher and truer understanding of what Yeats thought he was doing. Of what he conceived his strategy of maturation to be than any later autobiographical writings, many of which subtly distort and often recreate the conditions of Yeats's formative period. It is attempted here, therefore, to understand the conditions under which Yeats worked and to perceive them as he perceived them at the time. The landscape defined here is that seen by a younger Yeats, not by a 60-year-old smiling public man. The phrase Yeats used to describe himself in among school children. To this end, all quotations from Yeats's writings have been transcribed from the first editions of books, pamphlets, and periodicals whenever possible. My lecture has benefited my lecture is going to be benefited greatly from the Hegarty collection of Yeats's materials in the University of Kansas library, and from the willingness of the special collections staff, particularly Miss Alexandra Mason, to make those materials available. In terms of what is often said about the first half of Yeats's life, this evidence is worth reviewing. In his old age, Yeats became an extraordinary figure, an Irish demon, inspired by frenzy to shake the dead in their shrouds. His refusal to succumb to the sentimental complacencies of old age made him increasingly impressive to younger poets. Now that my ladder's gone, he wrote in one of his last poems, The Circus Animals Desertion. I must lie down where all the ladders start in the full rag and bone shop of the herd. But from the very beginning, Yeats was an unusual person, and much of his life has little or nothing to do with the modern world. He was born, after all, on June 13, 1865. His grandfather, the Reverend William Butler Yeats, was a skilled horseman who loved sports and dancing even after he became an evangelical rector of the Church of Ireland, the minority religion. His father, John Butler Yeats, turned into an apostate at Trinity College in the late 1850s after he had read Butler's Analogy. He also found congenial the teachings of John Stuart Mill, abandoning law in 1867, 1 year after he had been called to the bar. He became a painter of some skill, a nonconformist, and a stimulating, if unsettling, influence on his eldest son. Other influences from the distaff side, the poet's mother, Susan Pollock's included an abiding love of the Sligo countryside and of ghost stories. It is not surprising that a succession of moves from Ireland to England to Ireland again, or Sligo alternating with Dublin, and the strong influences of several generations of Yeats and Pollock's friends helped to develop in the growing boy a complicated, introspective personality. Yeats never acquired a regular education. He refused to go to Trinity, the school of his grandfather and his father. Indeed, he could not meet its entrance requirements. He briefly tried painting as a professional objective, registering at the Metropolitan School of Art, Dublin, and later at the Royal Hibernian Academy School from 1880. He wrote poems and stories, and his distant cousin Laura Armstrong called him the poet, but not until 1885 did he decide he wanted most to become a professional writer. We can look more closely at his career from this point on. Catherine Tynan in later years called him the only begetter of the new Irish poetry. In the spring of 1885, when Charles Hubbard Oldham introduced her to him, Yeats was 20 years old, all dreams and all gentleness, and his combative tendencies came later. Yeats had been reading with attention and approval Oldham's earnest publication, the Dublin University Review, which sought from the first issue onward, February 1885, to provide some outlet for the intellectual activity of its students and graduates, which would at the same time help to direct and develop the educated opinion of Dublin, and indeed we may say of all Ireland. And it was to this period that Yeats submitted not only his first published poem, Song of the Fairies and Voices, but a remarkable set of playlets, Mosada, the Island of Statues, and The Seeker. Although Charles Johnston, son of the Orange leader and a young man whom Yeats admired, praised them highly, perhaps even extravagantly. Yeats wrote them as exercises. Musada dealt with Inquisition Spain, about which Yeats knew little and may have cared less. It began with a dialogue between Musada, a young Moorish girl in the village of Azubia, who had been accused by Inquisition of practicing magic, and Kola, a lame beggar who, terrified by the threats of Inquisition officials, had betrayed her. They say, I am all ugliness. Why then should I be good? Kola's character was complicated by his jealousy of Musada's beauty, fear of her ability to conjure phantoms and visions, and anxiety for forgiveness. He even offered to go in her place, but Musada willingly awaited her destiny, and understanding his mixture of motives forgave his treachery. The holy man who had promised to burn heresy from this mad earth, and who had rejected the pleas for mercy from two monks, condemned Musada to death. But Musada, taking poison from a ring, became more than a nameless, faceless necromancer. She turned out to be his lost love. Be not so pale, dear love. Oh, can my kisses bring a flush no more upon thy face? How heavily thy head hangs on my breast. Listen, we shall be safe. We will fly from this before the morning star. Dear heart, there is a secret way that leads its paving length towards the river's marge. Here lies a shallop in the yellow reeds. Awake, awake, and we will sail afar, afar along the fleet white river's face, along with our own whispers and replies, alone among the murmurs of the dawn. But despite his willingness to renounce the faith, the holy man watched Musada die in his arms. He then returned to his religion and promised to importune the souls of other prisoners to penitence. The priest beneath his harsh mask had been a tormented and unhappy lover. Musada's interest in magic was not treated by the poet as evil, and her innocence remained unstained even by Kola's betrayal. For her, and at this stage in Yeats's career, the language of Shelley seemed most appropriate. A morning star, a shallow in the yellow reads a secret way. The subject matter of the play was the cold substitute that religious certainty offered in place of spiritual beauty. Musada dealt, however, tentatively in borrowed language and undramatic fashion with a theme that Yeats would find obsessive in later years. The Island of Statues, an Arcadian fairy tale, also showed the influence of Shelley, as well as Keats. No brief synopsis can do justice to this remarkably crowded series of events and cast of characters, and Yeats may well have been too ambitious in seeking to work out a personal religious credo, though this kind of extended metaphor. I am very religious, he wrote many years later in The Trembling of the Veil, 1922, and deprived by Huxley and Tyndall, whom I detested, of simple-minded religion of my childhood. I had made a new religion almost, an infallible church of poetic tradition, of a fardel of stories and of personages and of emotions inseparable from their expression, passed on from generation to generation by poets and painters with some help from philosophers and theologians. The Island of Statues is notable, however, for the cheerless and unattractive image of Arcadia that Yeats presented. In a world of quarrels, sadness, and cowardice, joy's brother fear dwells ever in each breast. Any kind, sorry, any any knight who might want to play the dragon or an enchanter oath had to leave behind him the poor race and leafy Arcady. Nestina, the Arcadian shepherdess, finally overthrew the enchantress of the island of statues in the major event of the play. She did so by displaying Saint Joseph's image on her necklace to the goblin queen, who thereupon vanished. Christ, in other words, had won still another victory over the powers of pagan world. Moreover, it was true that Nashina could love, and that the enchantress before her defeat envied her this ability. The enchantress had even promised her in exchange for this gift of a mortal the right to an eternal peace. Nevertheless, Yeats showed that a Christian victory might bring ambiguous blessings. Nashina rescued the sleepers whom the enchantress had put under a spell. And as they reluctantly awoke, they spoke of their memories of Aeneas, who had left for the shores of Carthage. Arthur, ruling from Uther's chair, the god Pan playing an oaten pipe unto a listening fawn, whose insolent eyes, unused to tears, would weep, and the tears of Troia and the Achaeans tented chiefs at bay. They did not want to return to Arcadia, the real world, Nashina's world. They preferred to remain on their island, and finally they elected as their new queen Nashina herself. She did not protest. The last lines described the shadows, unable or unwilling to leave behind Lake nurtured isle. Here grew the goblin flower of joy. Here sang a voice in sad fairy tones. The seeker, like the island of statues, cast in the form of a dramatic poem, consisted of two scenes. In the first, three shepherds peacefully watching a wood fire in a woodland valley were startled by the entry of an old knight. He had been lost, where spice isles nestle on the star-wrought seas, and where the polar winds and waters wrestle in endless dark, and by the weedy march of Asian rivers rolling on in light. But now he had come to the wood where lay the long lost forest of the sprite, and despite the efforts of the shepherds to dissuade him from entering that wood, he went forward with his eyes aglitter to his final rendezvous. In the second scene, after having searched through miseries inhuman for threescore years of dream-led wandering, he finally arrived at a ruined palace in the forest. He remembered that a voice had called him forth from mid the dance at his father's house, and had spoken words like banded adders in his breast. He became a coward in the field, yet he did not object, knowing that he had been singled out for a special destiny, that his ultimate goal was a joyous, unhuman, He demanded a glimpse of the face of the spirit that had made him travel. A sudden light burst over a motionless figure standing near the palace, and the weary aged knight realized that he had been pursuing infamy. A bearded witch, her sluggish head now bent on her broad breast. When he refused to believe that hers was indeed the magical, sweet voice that had led him on, she raised a mirror before him to reflect his face and form. His final words, cried before death overtook him, were again the voice. His dream had destroyed him, yet in the briefest possible compass had managed to suggest that the melancholy knight moving inevitably toward his death and willingly renounced and suffered all, even the loss of his reputation as a warrior for the sake of a love that ever retreated before him. Time and the Witch, Vivian, printed first in the Wanderings of Oisin and other poems 1889, also dealt with the confrontation toward which all dreamers move. Vivian took pride in her beauty. She loved the little golden greedy cup, whose gold reflected her gold, and her spells and secret lights above all. She wanted to test her wits against some fierce magician. When time appeared, she taunted him as the wrinkled squanderer of human wealth, refused to buy his wares, and gambled insouciantly with him for stakes that became increasingly valuable. But time was bound to win, not because he played with the loaded dice or because luck favored him, but because he was fated to win and always would. Vivian, even as he gambled, recognized how overwhelming were the odds against her. Thus play we first with pawns. Thus play we first with pawns, poor things and weak, and then the great ones come, and last the king. So men in life and I in magic play, first dreams and goblins and lesser spirits, and now with Father Time I'm face to face. Time warned Vivian that defeat would mean death, but for her life would lose its savior if she avoided her final gamble. It did not go to lay the hourglass on its side. Time would right it. She was surprised only that time's reckoning came so soon already. There were other dramatized lyrics from the Book of Gauri, the Indian section 5, on the nature of God, ephemera, jealousy, which Yeats later called the first scene of an unfinished play about a man loved by two women who had the one soul between them, which the sight of a man at Ross's Point carrying two salmon had inspired him to write, and a number of others that Yeats thought unworthy of printing. The playwrights were not sufficiently extended to permit adequate characterization and the iteration of ideas sometimes stifled dramatic possibilities, but ultimately the conflict between the world of dreams and monotonously triumphant world of time, an old peddler with a scythe, an hourglass, and a black bag. The world of Arcadia must be recognized as a war raging within Yeats's own sensibility, a lover's quarrel, not with the world but within himself. It was hard for him to understand why the certainties of history, religion, and science should inevitably triumph over the cloud and foam of a poet's imagination. Lest we judge harshly a dramatic poetry which cannot hold for a reader's attention, we should recall how quickly Yeats moved away from it. As early as 1888, he wrote to Catherine Tynan that he was dissatisfied since I have left the Ireland. Since I have left the Ireland, I have been going about on shoreless seas. Nothing anywhere has clear outline. He included very little of it in editions after 1890. Nevertheless, it was a useful beginning. His father, who admired dramatic poetry above all other kinds, thought well of Musada. He did the editor of the Irish Monthly, Father Matthew Russell, Gerard Manley Hopkins, who received a copy personally from John Butler Yeats, read it with some interest. As for the island of statues, Thomas William Rolleston, one of the John O'Leary's disciples, a man whose opinions Yeats respected, and later to a co-founder of the Rhymers Club, preferred it to the wanderings of Isil, not gone. When she first met, Yeats confessed that she had wept over it, and Henley was most enthusiastic. The playlet's prefigured later explorations of the possibility that the soul has dual allegiances. Most important, they established Yeats's right to be heard. So, this is the end of my first part. This is the my first part of the series, lecture series. This is the end of the first part of the lecture series. Thank you. We shall meet again very shortly. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.